Here we go with our final deep dive for the book of 1 Peter. I'm in chapter 5 and gave you a number of verses this last message, verses 10, verses 12, and then we jump back up to 5 and 6. And let me now take you back to verse 6, and we're going to look at verses 6 through 9. And what we're going to see in this is Peter's call to Christians under fire, because he gives a number of encouragements here and directives to us, almost like, laws to live out in the middle of times of difficulty and suffering. And so I'm going to read this whole passage, and then I'm going to walk back through the 4 or 5 verses here. Okay, so it starts in verse 6, which we've already read in our sermon, but I'm going to read it to you again. So humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time, he will lift you up in honor. So I talked about humility, the value of it, and I'll get back to that in just a second. Verse 7 says, give all your worries and cares to God, for he cares for you. Another version would say, cast all your anxieties on him, for he cares for you. A lot of us need to hear a verse like that today. Then verse 8 says, stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. And verse 9, which is our final verse, says, stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Remember that your family of believers all over the world is going through the same kind of suffering you are. Now, throughout this whole series, I've stayed in the version known as the New Living Translation. And so I'm there again today. And I would encourage you to pull that version up and look at these verses with me as I walk back through them. If you need to pause the video, go ahead, get your Bible out on your app, or go grab a Bible if you have this version, or pull it up on your computer so you can see it along with me. New Living Translation. And so this is Peter's call to Christians under fire. And I'm going to start with verse 6. It says, so humble yourselves under the mighty power of God, and at the right time, he will lift you up in honor. I talked a little bit about the mighty hand of God and about the mighty power of God in the sermon, and about how we need that in our lives. And it's like a flame, and we need to have humility so that we can hold on to that flame. But I want to give you a really great picture about what would be called the mighty power of God, or in some versions, the mighty hand of God. The mighty hand of God is a phrase that's used over and over and over again in the Old Testament, referring to God's power as he would work among his people, as he would direct, as he would do miracles, as he would send judgment or plague over and over again. And one of the places that I love to point out, because it's part of our vision stream, is in Exodus chapter 6, where it says, God will redeem you with an outstretched hand and mighty acts of judgment. So it shows you the power of God reaching for your benefit and protecting you, bringing judgment to those who are against you because you're blessed by him. He's talking about the children of Israel here, but it's a broader picture for all of us, that this is the things that God has always had for us. He wants to redeem us, and he wants to do it with that mighty hand, that powerful, mighty hand. So many references to this, but here's the picture. Peter wants us to know that God's destiny is on his people through his power when they walk in humility. God's destiny is on his people through his power when they walk in humility. And that's really the picture of this verse. God's mighty hand is for you, and he wants to work on your behalf. Humility releases the work of God's mighty hand. God's mighty hand on your behalf. So the first thing I want to say to you, if you're going to hear the call, Peter's call to Christians under fire, is this: be humble. Be humble, because that releases God's destiny in your life through his mighty power. And so be humble. The second call that Peter gives to Christians under fire is this: be at peace. You read it in verse 7. Give all your worries and cares to God. Give all your anxieties to God, for he cares about you, or he cares for you, other versions would say. I mean, I think about this season, and we're just all so drawn to anxiety during this season. It's a time where there's been so many what ifs, way more questions than answers. The goalposts keep moving. The field is not in play. Out of bounds is out of bounds, and inbound seems out of bounds, and we don't know what's going on. But Jesus says, in Matthew 6, don't worry. Don't worry about tomorrow. And we would go, thanks. You might even hear that today and go, okay, that's great, Andy. But really, what does that mean for me? And how do you do that? How do you actually do that? How is it possible to be at peace? It's possible because of the second part of this verse. The verse says, give all your worries and cares to God. Why? How? Well, you give them to him because he cares for you. You give them to him by simply saying, God, I know you care more than I do. I know you care about everything. You know every hair on my head. You know every challenge I face. And so I give you my cares, not because I just want to put my head in the sand and forget about it, but because I know you care for me. And because you care for me, I can believe, like what Romans 8:28 says, that everything's going to work for my good because I love you and I'm called according to your purpose. So maybe you just need to recount that. Maybe you need to explore how even these things in these days, in these weird times, can work for your good. And so you can practice knowing God loves you and he's caring for you and you are giving him your worries and your cares today. The third thing in Peter's call to Christians under fire is this: be aware. Verse 8 says, be aware. And here's what it says in verse 8. Stay alert. Watch out for your great enemy, the devil. He prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. You know, I like nature shows, and when I watch nature shows, I always have a tendency to really fixate on the lions, and I'm just fascinated by them. I don't even like cats, but I like lions, and I'm fascinated by them because they're so powerful, they're so swift, they're so calculated. And the truth is when they go after an animal, they go after one that's alone, that's sick, that's weak, that's vulnerable, that's young. Those are the ones that they go after. And so, you know, Peter is giving them a picture here. And he's saying, listen, maybe you're in a state right now because of your suffering where you feel alone, you feel weak, you feel sick, you feel vulnerable, right? You feel young in your faith because this is all just getting started. And you feel like the devil's like a prowling, roaring lion. He's out there seeking someone to devour. Be watchful, be sober, another version says, because you have an enemy. And so how do you defeat him? You defeat him just like you would defeat a roaring lion. You stay together. You stay in community. You stay in relationship. You stay close to other people. Be watchful. Don't allow your frustrations, your irritations, your disconnects relationally to cause you to move into isolation, because then the lion can get you. That roaring lion can draw you out. You're going to feel fear. You're going to feel anxiety. You're going to feel separation, and he's going to pounce on you. So be aware. That's what verse 8 is all about. Be aware. Now let's look at the last verse. And here it is. God's call, or Peter's call to Christians under fire. Be humble, be at peace, be aware, and then finally resist. Resist. Let's look at verse 9, especially the first half. It says, stand firm against him and be strong in your faith. Stand firm against this roaring lion. Resist him. James teaches us, resist the devil and what? He will flee from you. Resist. Peter's beginning to give them the seeds of how they're going to fight the enemy throughout their whole life. You see, the truth is the devil is a bully. And what do you do with a bully? You resist a bully. You show strength to a bully, and a bully will run away. He will fear that because he's looking for someone weaker so that he can prey on them. And that's why Ephesians 6 tells us to be strong in the Lord and in the power of his might, and to put on the full armor of God. This is how we resist the enemy. You're going to stand firm against him. What does Paul say in Romans 6 or in Ephesians 6? He says, after you've done everything to stand, then stand firm. Stand there. That's what Peter is saying too. Stand firm against him and be strong in your faith, because you can defeat a bully if you have the strength of God in you. And then as I wrap this little deep dive up, I want to take you to the last little part of that final verse. It's second half of verse 9. It says, remember that your family of believers all over the world is going through the same kind of suffering you are. I mean, that was a verse that was specifically applicable at the moment and specifically applicable right now. Not only just all believers, the whole world, including the believers, are all going through the exact same kind of suffering right now. Now, it might not look the same because we have a lot of comforts that people in the developing world don't. We can go stay at home and be safe. They stay at home and they starve, right? And so it's not exactly the same, but believers all over the world are going through times of suffering. And this is a perfect verse for right now because we're all in this together. And just understand, Peter was saying you're in a battle, but it's a battle you can win. And over the long haul, you will win. You see, I don't know what happened to these believers, but here we are today. They carried the torch, they carried the ball down the field, and here we are today. They faced persecution, yet Christianity is still here. They faced suffering, and yet Christianity still stands. And so here's what I say to you. Let's pick up the ball, let's carry it down the field, and let's be faithful as Christians under fire. God bless.